sound of a drone whirring faintly, cutting through the tense silence, followed by the sharp, angry buzz of a chainsaw. Voiceover. The HOA said my grandfather's fence was 2 inches over their arbitrary line. So they brought a lawyer and a bulldozer. They thought it was about rules, about power. Quick cut to a computer screen, showing satellite imagery overlaid with glowing red property lines and complex legal documents. Voiceover. They were wrong. It was about their secrets, buried for 50 years. They never thought to look up. They never realized my counterattack was already in the air. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, a day of suffocating humidity that made the crisp, ivory-colored envelope feel like an insult. It sat on the granite countertop, its embossed logo for the Crestwood Meadows Homeowners Association looking like a royal seal. Alex Sterling, a man whose profession was the art and science of drawing lines on the earth, stared at the one they had drawn for him. He'd inherited the house 6 months ago. It was the last piece of his grandfather, a sprawling ranch-style home on a double lot that backed onto an old-growth forest, a relic from before Crestwood Meadows had metastasized around it. The house was his sanctuary, a quiet place to grieve. The loss of his wife Sarah 2 years prior, it was where he planned to simply be. The HOA had other plans. He slit the envelope with a thumb, the paper making a sound like a disapproving sigh. The language was sterile, cold, and utterly devoid of reason. Violation Notice. CW 78B4. Dear Mr. Sterling, a routine community standards. Inspection on August 28th has identified a violation of the Crestwood Meadows Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, CC&Rs, on your property at 112 Oakwood Lane. Specifically, the row of sunflowers, Helianthus annuus, planted along your eastern property line has been observed to exceed the maximum floral height regulation of 6 feet as stipulated in Bylaw 7, Section 4.3. Aesthetic landscape integrity. Several blooms have been measured at heights approaching 9 feet. You are hereby instructed to remediate this violation within 14 days of the date of this notice. Failure to comply will result in a fine of $100, followed by subsequent fines of $50 per day until the property is brought into compliance. Alex read it again, a humorless laugh catching in his throat. The sunflowers. They were Sarah's favorite. Before she got sick, they had planned to fill the yard of whatever home they bought with them. After she was gone, planting them here, at his grandfather's house, had felt like a small, defiant act of keeping her memory alive. He'd tilled the soil himself, his hands aching, and planted the seeds in a long, sun-drenched row where the old wire fence used to be. They had grown tall and brilliant, their heavy heads following the sun like a silent, adoring audience. They were the one spot of untamed joy in his meticulously ordered life, and the HOA wanted him to kill them. His first instinct, the raw, primal one, was to march down the street to the home of the HOA president, Carol Becker, and wrap the letter around the ridiculously ornate flamingo statues in her yard. But Alex wasn't an impulsive man. His entire career as a geospatial analyst and licensed surveyor was built on precision, data, and the calm dismantling of problems. Anger was a muddy variable. He preferred clean data points. He spent the next hour online downloading the full 212-page Crestwood Meadows CC&Rs. It was a masterpiece of Orwellian pettiness. Regulations governed the permissible shades of beige for exterior paint, the exact angle of driveway inclines, the type of mulch, dyed mulch, was strictly forbidden, and, yes, there it was on page 87, section 4.3, aesthetic landscape integrity. No floral or vegetative planting, excluding approved trees, shall exceed a height of 6 feet. It was real. It was also insane. 2 days later, a Saturday, he saw her. Carol Becker, a woman whose posture suggested a permanent disagreement with the force of gravity, was standing on the sidewalk in front of his house. She was flanked by her loyal lieutenant, a balding, perpetually nervous man named Gary Henderson. Carol held a clipboard like a weapon. Gary clutched a tape measure as if it might spring to life and bite him. Alex stepped out onto his porch, letting the screen door slam with just enough force to announce his presence. "Can I help you?" Carol's smile was a thin, bloodless slash. "Mr. Sterling, we were just documenting the ongoing violation for our records." She made a check mark on her clipboard with a flourish. "The sunflowers are still standing, I see. Day 3. "They're flowers, Carol," Alex said, his voice level. "They're not hurting anyone." "They're a violation," she corrected, her tone laced, with the syrupy condescension of a kindergarten teacher explaining why you can't eat paste. "They block the sight lines, disrupt the uniform aesthetic of the neighborhood, and frankly, they look messy. This isn't a farm. My grandfather built this house 50 years ago, long before Crestwood Meadows existed," Alex countered, walking down the steps onto his lawn. "This land was a farm. Those trees," he gestured to the ancient oaks at the back of his property, "have been here longer than this entire subdivision. And when the property was incorporated into the association, the owner at the time agreed to the CC&Rs," Gary chimed in, puffing out his chest slightly. "It's a binding legal agreement." "I'm aware," Alex said, his eyes fixed on Carol. "I was hoping we could be reasonable. They're sunflowers. They'll be gone in a month or two when the season ends." Carol's smile tightened. "The rules don't take a vacation, Mr. Sterling. The community depends on us to enforce them without bias. If we let your weeds slide, what's next? People painting their doors unapproved shades of red? Letting their grass grow to 4 inches? It's a slippery slope to chaos and declining property values." The sheer, unadulterated absurdity of her statement left him momentarily speechless. She spoke of sunflowers as if they were a gateway drug to civic collapse. "They were my wife's favorite." "Flower," Alex said, the words quieter than he intended. It was a mistake he knew instantly. He had revealed a vulnerability. Carol's eyes, cold and reptilian, showed not a flicker of empathy. "That's a lovely sentiment, but personal feelings don't supersede community bylaws. You have 11 days. She turned to leave, a clear dismissal. "We'll be back." For the next week, Alex tried to ignore them. He went to work poring over satellite data and digital terrain models, losing himself in the clean, objective world of coordinates and elevations. But every evening when he came home, he'd see a new photograph, date-stamped, tucked under his door, a picture of his sunflowers from a slightly different angle, a passive-aggressive reminder that he was being watched. The morning of the 14th day, he woke to a sound that cut through the placid suburban quiet like a scream, the high-pitched whine of a commercial-grade weed whacker. He threw on a pair of jeans and was out the door in seconds. The scene on his lawn was one of calculated destruction. A landscaping truck was parked at the curb. 2 workers in matching green polo shirts were on his property. One was systematically decapitating his sunflowers with a string trimmer, a shower of golden petals and green stalks flying through the air, and standing on the sidewalk, directing the carnage with pointed fingers and a triumphant smirk, were Carol Becker and Gary Henderson. A torrent of rage, white-hot and pure, surged through Alex. It was so intense it felt like a physical blow. He strode across the lawn, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "What the hell are you doing?" he roared, his voice cracking with fury. The worker with the trimmer flinched and shut off the machine. The sudden silence was deafening. "We are remediating the violation," Carol said, her voice dripping with venomous satisfaction. She held up a piece of paper. "As per Section 12, subsection 8.1 of the CC&Rs, The association reserves the right of entry to correct a violation at the homeowner's expense if the homeowner fails to comply with a written notice. You will be billed for the service. This is my property. You are trespassing, Alex shouted, stepping between the worker and the remaining flowers. Read your covenants, Mr. Sterling, Gary squeaked, emboldened by Carol's presence. You granted us this right when you took ownership. Alex pulled out his phone, his hands shaking slightly as he hit the record button. Get off my property, now! Carol laughed, a short, sharp bark. Are you threatening us? That's another fine. We have every legal right to be here. Finish the job, she ordered the landscaper. The worker hesitated, looking from Carol's smug face to Alex's thunderous one. I am telling you, as the property owner, to leave, Alex said, his voice low and dangerous, each word a chip of ice. He looked directly at the landscaper. If you take one more step, I will have you charged with trespassing and destruction of property. Her signature on your work order won't mean a thing in a court of law when I show them this video. The worker looked at his partner, then back at Carol. He wasn't being paid enough for this. He lowered the weed whacker and backed away slowly. Sorry, lady. We're done. Carol's face contorted in a mask of fury. You can't do that. We have a contract. The landscapers were already walking back to their truck. Call the office, one said over his shoulder. Carol rounded on Alex, her eyes blazing. You have made a grave mistake. This is not over. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Oh, I think I do, Alex said, the cold calm of his professional self beginning to settle over the fire of his rage. You're a bully who gets her kicks out of destroying a dead woman's flowy. The world was shrouded in the deep, hazy blue of pre-dawn when Alex launched the matrice. It rose from his back deck with a sound like a contained whisper, its 4 rotors slicing the thick, humid air. There were no flashing navigation lights. He had disabled them. This was a black flight. On his controller's screen, the world resolved into a high-definition, thermal-enhanced view. The manicured lawns of Crestwood Meadows were cool, dark carpets, while the asphalt streets and concrete driveways retained the previous day's heat, glowing like pale, sleeping rivers. Alex's hands were steady on the controls. This was his element. In his previous life, working government contracts, he had flown drones over terrain far more hostile than this, for stakes far higher. But this felt different. This was personal. This was a precise, surgical strike into the heart of Carol Becker's smug little kingdom. He guided the drone to an altitude of 300 feet, well above the threshold of casual notice, and flew a wide perimeter around the neighborhood, his eyes scanning the thermal display. No early risers, no dog walkers. The only signs of life were the heat signatures of sleeping houses and the occasional raccoon skittering across a lawn. He was clear. He brought the drone in, lowering its altitude over Carol's property at 14 Crestwood Circle. Her house was one of the largest, a 2-story mock Tudor with an immaculate lawn that looked like it was cut with scissors. And there it was. Even in the ghostly thermal view, the rose garden was an obvious feature. A perfect circle of warmer earth, its meticulously arranged bushes radiating a faint, living heat. Alex switched from the thermal camera to the standard 20x optical zoom. The pre-dawn light was just enough. He could see the individual rose bushes, their blooms tightly closed against the coming day. He took a deep breath, his knuckles white on the controller. Okay, Carol, he murmured to the empty room. Let's see what you're hiding. He initiated the pre-programmed flight path. The drone began to move, flying a precise grid pattern just 50 feet above the garden. This wasn't about photography. Attached to the drone's undercarriage was a small cylindrical device, a sensitive magnetometer. Its sole purpose was to detect variations in the Earth's magnetic field, specifically the kind of anomaly created by a concentrated mass of ferrous metal buried just beneath the surface. like a 1-inch iron survey pin from 1974. On one of his monitors, a data stream began to scroll, plotting the magnetic field intensity. For several passes, the line remained relatively flat, with minor jitters from buried pipes or electrical conduits that he had already mapped and filtered out. Alex watched, his body perfectly still, his entire consciousness focused on the screen. The drone executed a turn, starting its 5th pass, moving directly over the center of the garden. The line on the graph jagged upwards. It wasn't a small flutter, it was a spike, sharp and violent, like an EKG registering a massive cardiac event. It screamed anomaly in the silent language of data. He held the drone steady, hovering directly over the peak reading. The GPS coordinates, on his screen locked in, numbers glowing in the dim light of his office. He compared them to the coordinates from his calculations. They were a perfect match, down to the 4th decimal place, a difference of less than 2 centimeters. A slow, grimly satisfied smile touched Alex's lips. Gotcha. He saved the magnetometer data, the flight logs, the high-resolution imagery, and the RTK GPS track. He created a new encrypted folder on his server and labeled it Project Sunfall. He flew the drone back on a silent, circuitous route and landed it on his deck as the first birds began to sing. The operation had taken less than 20 minutes. The first shot in his war had been fired, and the enemy didn't even know it. By 9 a.m., Alex was on a video call with a woman named Evelyn Reed. He'd found her through his professional network. Her online bio described her as a ferociously dedicated litigator specializing in land use, zoning, and complex property disputes. Her picture showed a woman in her late 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense expression that suggested she ate HOA presidents for breakfast. "Mr. Sterling," she began, her voice crisp and clear through his speakers. "Your email was compelling. You believe there's a significant plat discrepancy in your subdivision. That's a serious claim. What's your evidence?" Alex shared his screen. "I'm a licensed surveyor and geospatial analyst, Ms. Reed. This is what I do for a living." He walked her through it step by step. He showed her the original 1974 plat map from the county records, then the current county GIS overlay. He pointed out the single-degree bearing error. Then he pulled up his own projection, the stark red lines of the original survey laid over the satellite image of the neighborhood. The error compounds. Over the 1,500-foot main boundary line, it results in a lateral shift of nearly 26 feet. Evelyn Reed was silent for a long moment, her eyes scanning the screen. She zoomed in on the details, her expression unreadable. "This is Becker Developments, Inc., she stated, more than asked. "I've dealt with them before. Old Man Becker was notorious for cutting corners. So you're saying the entire subdivision is built on a faulty survey?" "I'm saying the legal boundaries as recorded in the original deed are not the boundaries the homeowners, or the HOA, are observing today." "And you believe you've located the original point-of-beginning monument?" "I have a high-confidence magnetic anomaly at the exact calculated coordinates," Alex said carefully. "It's consistent with a buried 1-inch iron pin approximately 2 feet down. And it's in the HOA president's flower bed," Evelyn said, a flicker of something that looked like amusement in her eyes. "The irony is thick enough to bottle. What's your goal here, Mr. Sterling? Are you looking for a payout? To burn the whole place to the ground?" Alex thought of the shredded sunflowers, of the smug look on Carol's face. "I was invaded," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "My property was damaged. My wife's memory was desecrated. All in the name of their rules. I want to use their own rules against them. I want them to understand what a real boundary is. And then I want them to pay for what they did." Evelyn nodded slowly. "I see. Okay, your data is compelling, but it's not yet legal proof. A judge would tear apart a magnetic anomaly from a drone flight you conducted yourself. You need ground truth. You need a licensed third-party surveyor to physically locate and certify the monument. But they'd have to dig up her garden. She'd never allow it, Alex said. She won't have a choice, Evelyn replied, a predatory gleam in her eye. Under state law, a licensed surveyor has the right of entry onto a property for the purpose of locating boundary monuments referenced in a legal deed or plat map. It's a limited right, but it's ironclad. If she denies access, we can get a court order in a day, and she'll be liable for all associated legal fees. She's the president of the HOA. Denying a legal survey would be a spectacular breach of her fiduciary duty. The plan began to take shape, clean and beautiful in its simplicity. So, what's the first step? Alex asked. You officially hire the best survey company in the county. You instruct them to conduct a full boundary survey of your property, 112 Oakwood Lane. You tell them you have reason to believe the commonly accepted lines are inaccurate and that their survey must be based on the original 1974 plat map and the location of its primary monument. They will handle the official notifications. In the meantime, I will draft a letter. 2 days later, another crisp ivory envelope arrived at 14 Crestwood Circle. But this one didn't come from the HOA. It was from the law offices of Reed and Associates, Carol. Becca read the letter in her kitchen, a cup of herbal tea growing cold beside her. Gary Henderson was on speakerphone, having received a similar notification via email as the HOA's secretary. Pursuant to a formal request by our client, Mr. Alexander Sterling, Carol read aloud, her voice tight with disbelief. We are providing notice that a full boundary survey of the property at 112 Oakwood Lane will be conducted by Northgate Surveying, LLC, a state-licensed and bonded firm. The survey will commence on or about Monday, September 8th. A survey? Gary squawked through the phone. What on earth for? Is he trying to build something? We can shut that down. Let me finish, Carol snapped. Due to discrepancies identified in the initial title research, the surveyors will be required to locate and verify the original 1974 subdivision monuments in order to establish a legally sound point of beginning for the survey, as is their right under State Statute 11-4b-3. This may require brief access to community common areas and adjacent private properties. We trust the board will provide its full cooperation. Discrepancies? What discrepancies? Gary stammered. This is harassment, Carol. He's retaliating because of the sunflowers. We should fine him, sue him for frivolous legal action. Carol was silent. The letter felt wrong. It was too formal, too confident. Men like Sterling, when backed into a corner, were supposed to lash out emotionally. They were supposed to yell or file petty complaints. They didn't hire expensive lawyers and land surveyors. It was like swatting a fly, only for the fly to return with a squadron of fighter jets. It's a bluff, she said, more to convince herself than Gary. He's trying to intimidate us, to make us back down. He's trying to cost the association money to make a point. So what do we do? Gary asked, his voice trembling slightly. A cold resolve settled over Carol. She would not be in. The retreat from Alex's property was a rout. Carol Becker didn't march. She fled, her 2 lieutenants trailing behind like smoke from a dying fire. The words, somewhere in the middle of your rose garden, echoed in her head, a psychic shrapnel that shredded her composure. It wasn't just a threat. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the cold certainty of a surgeon announcing a terminal diagnosis. How could he possibly know? Had he been snooping? Did he talk to some old-timer from the original construction? Crew? The questions swarmed in her mind, a frantic, buzzing panic that eclipsed her rage. Back in the sterile silence of her own home, she slammed the door, the sound rattling a set of porcelain birds on a nearby shelf. What was that, Carol? Gary stammered, wringing his hands. What did he mean? Your rose garden? He's bluffing, Carol snapped, pacing her immaculate living room. but her voice lacked its usual steel. It was brittle, thin. "It's a guess. A lucky, vicious guess." "It didn't sound like a guess," Ron offered weakly. "He looked like he had the winning lottery ticket in his pocket." "Shut up, Ron," she hissed. She stalked to her window and stared out at her garden, the perfectly sculpted oasis that was the envy of the neighborhood. It was no longer a source of pride. It was a crime scene waiting to be discovered. The thought of strangers in white trucks, carrying shovels and sophisticated equipment, digging into her sacred ground, made her feel physically ill. They wouldn't just be digging for a pin. They'd be digging for the rotten foundation of her authority, her family's legacy. Panic gave way to a chilling, desperate clarity. Monday. The surveyors were coming on Monday. That gave her less than 48 hours. She couldn't stop them from coming, not with a lawyer like Evelyn Reed involved. But what if, when they arrived, there was nothing to find? A plan, reckless and criminal, began to form in her mind. "Gary, stay," she commanded as Ron made his excuses and scurried away, eager to distance himself from the impending implosion. "We have work to do." That night, just after 2 a.m., two figures dressed in dark clothing moved through the shadows of Crestwood Circle. Carol wore black yoga pants and a dark hoodie, her hair pulled back tightly. Gary, pale and sweating despite the midnight chill, looked like a man being led to his own execution. He clutched a new store-bought shovel as if it were a venomous snake. Carol carried a smaller, sharper garden spade and a high-powered flashlight. "I can't believe we're doing this," Gary whispered, his voice trembling. "This is insane, Carol. This has to be illegal." "What's illegal?" Carol whispered back, her voice a low, intense hiss. "Is that arrogant bastard trying to dismantle this community over a handful of weeds. What's insane is letting him do it. Now be quiet and help me find the center." She paced off the dimensions of the circular garden, her movements practiced and precise. She triangulated the center point, right between two of her most prized grandiflora bushes. "Here," she said, marking an X in the soft, mulched soil with her heel. "Dig here." Gary hesitated. "Carol, if we get caught..." "Who is going to catch?" "Us?" she shot back, her patience gone. "Everyone is asleep. And if anyone asks, we're dealing with a nocturnal pest. A mole, perhaps. Now dig!" While they plunged their shovels into the rich, dark earth of the rose garden, a silent, unseen eye watched from 350 feet above. In his office, Alex sat before his monitors, a cup of black coffee steaming beside him. The thermal display showed two bright, man-shaped heat signatures moving frantically within the cooler circle of the garden. The drone was perfectly still, a silent electronic gargoyle perched in the night sky. He was recording everything. "Come on, Carol," he murmured, leaning closer to the screen. "Show me what I know you're looking for." On the ground, the work was grueling. The soil was dense, packed with clay and roots. Carol dug with a frenzied energy, tossing dirt over her shoulder with no regard for the surrounding plants. Gary, clumsy and terrified, was more of a hindrance than a help, his shovel scraping uselessly at the dirt. "This is pointless," he panted after 15 minutes, leaning on his shovel. "It could be anywhere. It could be 5 feet down." "It's here," Carol grunted, her face streaked with dirt and sweat. "I can feel it." Alex watched on his screen, a grim smile on his face. He toggled a command. The drone's gimbal-mounted camera zoomed in, switching from thermal to its low-light optical mode. The image was grainy, bathed in the ethereal green of night vision, but it was clear enough. He could see the desperation on their faces, illuminated by their own flashlight beam. He saved a high-resolution still image. It was beautifully, damnably incriminating. Then, it happened. Carol's spade struck something in the hole they'd excavated. It wasn't the dull thud of a rock. It was a sharp, metallic clang that echoed in the silent night. They both froze. Dropping to her knees, Carol clawed at the loose dirt in the bottom of the hole. Her fingers brushed against something hard, round, and cold. It was rusted but unmistakable. The top of an iron pin. Gary shone the flashlight into the hole. There it was. An ugly, corroded piece of metal that invalidated every property line, every fence, every neatly defined lawn in their perfect little world. It was real. Alex had been right. "Oh my God," Gary breathed, stumbling backward. "It's real." Carol stared at it, her mind a maelstrom of terror and fury. The proof. The physical, tangible proof of her family's 50-year-old sin. She grabbed the top of the pin with both hands and pulled, grunting with effort. It didn't move. She tried to wiggle it back and forth. It was set deep, anchored in the earth with the unyielding certainty of the law itself. "Help me," she commanded Gary. "We have to get it out." "We can't," he squeaked, his voice cracking. "Carol, that thing is probably set in concrete. We'll need a winch. We have to stop." He was right. They couldn't extract it. Not with their simple tools. Not before sunrise. A new, colder wave of panic washed over Carol. They had not only confirmed the pin's existence, but they had also created a freshly dug hole that pointed directly to it. They had built a signpost for their own damnation. "Fine," she hissed, her mind racing. "Fine! We fill it in. We cover it up. We put everything back. We pack the dirt down. We replace the mulch. No one will ever know we were here." For the next hour, they worked in a panicked frenzy, shoveling the dirt back into the hole, tamping it down with their feet, smoothing the mulch over the top. When they were done, the garden looked mostly right, in the dark at least. But the soil was loose. The mulch was disturbed. 2 of the rose bushes were trampled. It was a clumsy, amateurish cover-up, and they both knew it. From the sky, Alex recorded it all. The discovery. The failed attempt to remove the pin. The frantic cover-up. He had it all. At 4 a.m., as the 2 figures finally scurried back into the house, he flew the drone home, the evidence secure. Monday morning arrived, bright, clear, and merciless. At 8:30 a.m. sharp, a white truck from Northgate Surveying, LLC, pulled up to the curb. 2 men got out. The lead surveyor was a man named Dave Miller, a veteran with a sun-weathered face and an air of absolute competence. He and his younger assistant began unloading their equipment with practiced efficiency, a tripod, a prism pole, and a high-precision GPS rover. Alex was waiting on his porch. Evelyn Reed pulled up a moment later, getting out of her car with a slim leather briefcase. They exchanged a brief, quiet nod. They weren't there to interfere, merely to observe. As Dave began setting up his tripod on the sidewalk, Carol Becker emerged from her house. She had tried to compose herself. She wore a crisp linen pantsuit. Her hair was perfect, her face a mask of strained civility. "Good morning," she said, her voice a little too bright. "Can I help you?" Dave consulted his clipboard. "Ma'am, are you Carol Becker, owner of 14 Crestwood Circle?" "I am. I'm also the president of the Homeowners Association." "Dave Miller, Northgate Surveying," he said, not offering a hand. "We're here on behalf of Mr. Sterling of 1 to 12 Oakwood to conduct a boundary survey. As per the notice, our first task is to locate and verify the subdivision's primary monument, which the plat map indicates is on your property. We'll be as quick and undisruptive as possible." Carol forced a tight, brittle smile. "I'm afraid today is not a good day. We've had, a major malfunction with the sprinkler system in that part of the yard. The ground is saturated and there are exposed lines. For your own safety, you can't dig here today. We'll have to reschedule." Dave looked from her face to the perfectly dry lawn, then back again. His expression didn't change. "Ma'am, we have a legal right of entry to locate this monument. Denying us access is a serious matter. We're not going to be doing any major excavation. We'll just be using a probe and a small shovel. We'll be careful of any sprinkler lines." "I am not denying you access," Carol said, her voice rising slightly. I am postponing it for your own safety. I cannot, in good conscience, allow you to work in a hazardous area. The HOA's insurance would never cover it." From across the street, Evelyn Reed took a quiet step forward. Dave, seeing her, gave a slight nod. He knew who she was. "Ma'am," Dave said, his tone shifting from polite to authoritative. "We have the original plat map, a court-ordered work order, and the law on our side. We are going to locate that pin. We can do this with your cooperation, or we can call the sheriff's department to supervise. It's your choice. But either way, it's happening now." The bluff had failed. Carol was trapped. The pantsuit and the word felony hung in the bright morning air, as tangible and heavy as a block of granite. Carol Becker stood frozen, her face a ghastly collage of shock and dawning terror. The world had tilted on its axis. The hunters had become the hunted. Dave Miller, the surveyor, made a few more notes on his clipboard, his expression impassive. He was a man of data and legal fact, and the scene before him was just another data point. A tampered monument, a terrified property owner. It was not his job to pass judgment, only to record the truth. "We have what we need here," he said to his assistant, his voice cutting through the thick silence. "Let's get the offset measurements for the Sterling property." As the surveyors moved off with professional indifference, the spell broke. Carol emitted a small, strangled sound, half gasp, half sob. She turned, stumbling like a drunk, and fled into her house, the slam of her front door the final definitive punctuation mark on the end of her reign. Across the street, Evelyn Reed closed her briefcase with a quiet, satisfying snap. "Well," she said to Alex, a thin, triumphant smile on her lips, "that went even better than planned. The official report from Northgate will be the nail in the coffin, but that man's testimony alone is damning." "What happens now?" Alex asked, watching the surveyors work down the street. "Now the wildfire starts," Evelyn said, "and then we present our terms of surrender." She was right. The story of the confrontation on Carol Becker's lawn ripped through Crestwood Meadows with astonishing speed. It traveled via text messages filled with shocked face emojis, hushed phone calls between neighbors, and furtive conversations over backyard fences. The narrative, though fuzzy on the details, was electrifying in its implications. "Did you see? Surveyors at Carol's house, and a lawyer. They were digging in her prize-winning roses. She looked like she was going to have a stroke. I heard Bill from down the street say he heard the surveyor mention a felony. A felony. What does it mean? Someone said all the property lines are wrong. Is my pool on your land? Panic. A long suppressed emotion in the obsessively controlled environment of Crestwood Meadows began to bubble to the surface. For years, Carol's power had been absolute because the rules, however petty, were perceived as stable and unassailable. Now, Alex had revealed that the very ground beneath their feet was a lie. The foundation wasn't cracked, it was non-existent. Carol wasn't a guardian of order. She was the queen of a crooked kingdom. Her authority evaporated in the space of a single morning. 2 days later, the official report from Northgate Surveying arrived in Evelyn Reed's inbox. It was 20 pages of dry, technical language, accompanied by maps, data tables, and photographs. It was, in its own dispassionate way, a weapon of mass destruction. It officially certified the location of the 1974 monument. It detailed the 26-foot discrepancy and confirmed that virtually every property line in the subdivision was in legal jeopardy. And, in a carefully worded section titled Site Observations, Dave Miller noted, "The ground surrounding monument number 7401 showed clear evidence of recent and significant soil disturbance, inconsistent with natural settling or approved landscaping activity. The soil was loosely packed, and the root systems of adjacent flora were damaged. These observations are indicative of a recent, unauthorized excavation and subsequent attempt to conceal said excavation." Attached was a series of high-resolution, time-stamped photos of the disturbed earth. "It's perfect," Evelyn said on the phone to Alex. He gives us everything we need to allege tampering without explicitly accusing her of a crime in his report. He's a pro. Now for the fun part. The package that arrived at the HOA's official mailing address the next morning was thick and heavy. A copy was also sent directly to every member of the board of directors: Carol, Gary, Ron, and 2 others. Inside was not just a letter from Evelyn Reed, but a flash drive. Ron, the retired insurance salesman, opened his package with a sense of dread. He read the cover letter first. It was a masterpiece of legal devastation. It summarized the findings of the Northgate report. It outlined the potential for a catastrophic wave of litigation. Homeowners suing the HOA, neighbors suing neighbors, everyone suing their title insurance companies. It painted a picture of financial ruin for the association and legal chaos for the entire community. Then, it laid out the terms of a pre-litigation settlement offer. The demands were stark: the immediate and permanent resignation of Carol Becker and Gary Henderson, a full public apology to Alex Sterling, complete financial restitution for all his costs, and a homeowner-led initiative to redraft the community's CC&Rs. The letter concluded with a chilling paragraph. Should the board of directors fail to accept these terms in full within 72 hours, we will be forced to proceed. A class action lawsuit will be filed against the HOA for gross negligence and breach of fiduciary duty. Furthermore, the enclosed evidence of criminal activity will be forwarded to the district attorney's office for immediate prosecution. We strongly advise you to review the contents of the provided flash drive before making your decision. With a trembling hand, Ron inserted the flash drive into his laptop. A single video file popped up: Project Check Sunfall, Evidence 01.mp4. He clicked play. The screen filled with a grainy, ethereal green image. It was unmistakably Carol's rose garden, viewed from above. He saw 2 heat signatures, 2 figures. He watched in stunned silence as they dug frantically in the dark. He saw the glint of metal. He saw their failed attempts to pry it from the ground. He saw them hastily covering their tracks. It was undeniable. It was a digital ghost silently recording a crime. Alex hadn't just had a hunch. He'd had a God's eye view. Ron felt a wave of nausea. He had stood by Carol for years, endorsing her petty crusades, believing she was, at her core, protecting their property values. He saw now that he had been a foot soldier for a fraud and a felon. His loyalty, already fractured, shattered completely. It was replaced by the cold, hard instinct of self-preservation. An emergency closed-door meeting of the board was called for that evening. They met in the soulless beige community center meeting room. The air was thick with tension and betrayal. Carol arrived last, her face pale but her expression defiant, a cornered animal preparing for its final stand. "This is an outrage," she began, throwing her copy of the letter onto the table. "He's blackmailing us. We cannot give in to this extortion." "Shut up, Carol," Ron said, his voice flat and dead. "Just shut up. I saw the video. The other 2 board members, a quiet accountant named Maria and a retired dentist named Arthur, both nodded grimly. Gary Henderson looked like he was about to vomit. "It was a misunderstanding," Carol insisted, her voice growing shrill. "I thought there was a pipe leaking. We were investigating." "At 2 in the morning? With shovels?" Maria asked, her voice dripping with contempt. "You lied to us, Carol. You lied about everything. The survey your husband's father commissioned was flawed from the start, and you had to have known. You've been ruling this neighborhood based on a lie. And you committed a felony," Arthur added, his jowls trembling with anger. "A felony! You could go to prison. Do you have any idea the kind of liability you've exposed us all to? Our director's insurance won't cover criminal acts." The fight was over before it began. Her allies had turned on her. Gary sat in his chair, head in his hands, muttering, "I told her we shouldn't do it. I told her." "You are pathetic, all of you," Carol spat, venom in her voice. "Running at the first sign of a fight. I built this community's reputation." "You've destroyed it," Ron countered. "And we are not going down with you. We're taking the deal. We're voting now." The vote was 4-1. Carol was stripped of her power in less than 5 minutes. Gary was instructed to co-sign her letter of resignation. They were given pre-written templates. It was over. The emergency homeowners meeting was held the next night. The community center was packed to capacity, the room buzzing with 1,000 rumors. Alex sat in the back row, a quiet observer. He felt no glee, no elation, just a profound, weary sense of grim necessity. Ron, looking 10 years older, stood at the podium, his hands shaking as he unfolded a piece of paper. "Good evening," he began, his voice hoarse. "This emergency meeting has been called to announce several significant developments regarding the leadership and governance of the Crestwood Meadows HOA." A hush fell over the crowd. "Effective immediately," Ron continued, reading from the statement, "Carol Becker and Gary Henderson have tendered their resignations from the board of directors." A wave of gasps and shocked murmurs swept through the room. Furthermore, the board wishes to issue a formal and public apology to Mr. Alexander Sterling of 112 Oakwood Lane. The association's actions regarding his property were unauthorized, inappropriate, and deeply regrettable. The board will be providing Mr. Sterling with full restitution for all damages and associated costs. All eyes turned to Alex in the back. He simply nodded, his expression unreadable. Ron cleared his throat, gathering himself for the final bombshell. Finally, as a result of a recent, legally certified land survey, significant discrepancies have been confirmed regarding the original 1974 plat map and the existing property lines throughout our community. The board is consulting with legal, counsel, and the county to determine the full extent of the issue and the necessary steps for remediation. He paused, letting the weight of that news sink in. As the homeowners meeting did not end in a riot, but in 1,000 quiet, bewildered conversations. The rigid social hierarchy of Crestwood Meadows had been decapitated, leaving a vacuum. People who had only ever communicated in polite, HOA-approved nods were now clustered in the parking lot, talking animatedly, their faces a mixture of shock, confusion, and a dawning, unfamiliar sense of liberation. Alex slipped out a side door, wanting no part of the spotlight. He had been a catalyst, a wrecker of a corrupt system, but he had no desire to be a king. As he walked home under the glow of the streetlights, a car pulled up beside him. It was his next-door neighbor, a quiet man named Tom, whom Alex had only ever seen mowing his lawn with meticulous, fearful precision. Tom rolled down the window. "Hey," he said, his voice hesitant. "That was something else." "It was," Alex agreed. "Listen, I just wanted to say thank you," Tom said, finally meeting Alex's eyes. "My wife has wanted to plant a vegetable garden for 10 years. We got a violation notice for unapproved horticulture just for having a tomato plant in a pot on our deck." He shook his head, a small, incredulous smile playing on his lips. "You did a good thing. It was a small moment, but it was the first crack in the wall of isolation that had surrounded Alex since he'd moved in. He wasn't just the strange, grieving widower anymore. He was a neighbor. The weeks that followed were a strange, chaotic, and ultimately constructive period for Crestwood Meadows. Evelyn Reed, on behalf of Alex, helped guide a newly formed homeowners steering committee. The legal situation was, as she put it, a Gordian knot tied by a cheapskate. The cost to legally resurvey and redeed every single one of the 150 properties would be astronomical. The solution, she explained in a new, more collaborative community meeting, was a mass, boundary line agreement. Every homeowner would have to agree, in writing, to accept the as-built lines, the fences and driveways and garages, as their new legal boundaries. It was a monumental undertaking in collective action, requiring a level of cooperation the neighborhood had never known. Alex, initially reluctant, found himself at the center of the effort. He took his high-resolution aerial maps, overlaid them with both the fake and the real property lines, and hosted informal sessions in his garage. He explained the complex survey data in simple terms, showing people exactly how the lines had shifted. He showed them that by signing the agreement, they weren't losing land they never knew they had. They were protecting the homes they lived in now. He wasn't giving orders, he was providing clarity. He was helping his neighbors rebuild their world on a foundation of truth. One afternoon, Evelyn called him. "We have a decision to make about our friend Carol," she said. "The DA's office has seen the video. They're very interested. Tampering with survey monuments is a serious offense, and they have her dead to rights. If you want to press charges, they will proceed." Alex thought for a long moment. He pictured Carol's face at that final meeting, stripped of all its power and prestige. He pictured her in a courtroom, then in a jail cell. The image didn't bring him any satisfaction. "What's happened to her?" he asked. "As far as I know, she's a pariah," Evelyn said. "No one in the neighborhood will speak to her. Her husband's development company is facing a massive lawsuit from the title insurance underwriter for the entire subdivision. Her reputation is in ashes." A week later, Alex saw the final confirmation. A "for sale" sign being hammered into Carol, Becker's perfect lawn, right next to the trampled, now neglected rose garden. It was a quiet, ignominious exile. "No," Alex said into the phone. "Let's not press charges. What she built was her entire world. We made her watch it burn, let her live with the ashes." It was an act of mercy, but also a strategic one. He wanted to build a new community, not one haunted by the ghost of the old one. The seasons turned. The boundary line agreement was a slow, arduous process, but it worked. 98% of the homeowners signed on, and the few holdouts were eventually convinced by the sheer momentum of the community. The old draconian CC&Rs were formally dissolved by a near-unanimous vote, replaced by a simple set of guidelines covering safety and the maintenance of shared spaces. The visual change to the neighborhood was gradual, then sudden. A house down. The street was painted a cheerful, unapproved shade of blue. Tom, the next-door neighbor, built 2 beautiful raised beds for his wife's vegetable garden. Someone else installed a small, tasteful fence for their dog without needing a 20-page application. The beige monolith was cracking, and in its place, something more colorful, more human, was beginning to grow. One bright Saturday in late spring, a full year after the first violation notice had arrived, Alex was in his yard. The air was warm, and the soil was rich and dark in his hands. He wasn't alone. Tom was there, helping him till a long, straight line along the eastern edge of his property. They didn't talk much, working in the comfortable silence of men engaged in a shared task. Alex opened a small canvas bag and poured a stream of striped seeds into his palm. They were the same kind he had planted before, Sarah's kind. He walked the line, pressing each seed into the earth. It felt different this time. The first planting had been a quiet act of defiance, a secret memorial in hostile territory. This time it was an act of creation, of reclamation. It was a declaration that this was his home, a place of peace, a sanctuary he had fought for and won. By midsummer, the sunflowers were magnificent. They grew taller and stronger than the previous years, their thick stalks reaching 7, then 8, then 10 feet into the air. Their bright, heavy heads faced the sun, a brilliant, joyful phalanx standing guard over his property. No one measured them. No one sent letters. They were just beautiful. One evening, Alex sat on his back deck with a cold beer, watching the last rays of sunlight set the golden petals ablaze. The drone was packed away in its case in the office, its work done. The sky above was no longer a battlefield or a vantage point. It was just the sky, vast and peaceful. He looked at the row of sunflowers, a living testament to his wife's memory and a symbol of his own hard-won peace. The entitled board had invaded his property, and his counterattack had indeed come from the sky. But his victory wasn't the ruined life of Carol Becker or the chaos he had unleashed. His victory was this: the quiet of his own backyard, the freedom to grow something beautiful, the simple, profound right to be left alone in a home. That was finally truly his. And for the first time in a very long time, Alex Sterling felt completely at peace.